Good morning from brunch.
Good morning, Mr. Brunch. I'm about to send out a few texts to remind some of our people.
Hope you had a good weekend.
Yeah, it's boiling here. How hot is it in the city?
Mid 80s here. It was really bad last week, though. I had 4 days in a row that were over 104. It was just totally brutal.
What does that mean in
Well, it's 104 Fahrenheit.
yeah, but how much is
So,
that in
hang on, let me ask Google to translate that for us. Let's see.
have you got
40.
email? What's that?
40.
Yeah, that's insane. That is quite crazy. Let me see. So where's Brandalerius? Okay, cool. Yeah. Did you get the contact detail of that presenter?
Yeah, I have her email address. I still have to draft the letter, and I'll get that out today or tomorrow.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, we're able to watch those videos from her. They're very useful.
I saw a little bit, not a lot. Here, the temperature is also hot, but not as hot as you. It's 31 right now, so it's a bit, yeah, things slow down.
Yeah, the only plant that's happy in the garden is the jalapeno pepper.
That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny.
Scary thing is they say the more brutal the weather is, the hotter the pepper will be when you harvest it. So
Yeah, that's interesting. That looks like that sounds like rubbish, but it may actually be true. One of those.
hi, Fabian.
I don't know, Peter. How are you doing?
Good. Hi, Danny.
Where's Denny?
I'm here. Good morning. Hey, Peter,
Morning.
contact that person that you recommended to be a speaker. So thank you for that recommendation. And Fabienne, the same for you. And got some good names coming up.
Yeah, I found her email address, so I'll write to her today or tomorrow.
That'd be great. That'd be great. We'll talk about, Frodo, do you have a specific day that we want to invite her to in July?
No, just hang on a second here, Denny.
Peter, if we can have her at the end of the month, because I'm going to be traveling to Toronto this next Monday. I don't want
Okay,
to miss her.
I'll
So
feel
if
her
you
out for
could
the end
have
of the
her,
month.
end of the month would be better because I'm going to be traveling.
I hope it's only your picture, Peter, and not you're not wearing a suit and tie today.
Oh, no.
And
T-shirt,
Mark is on the
down,
English Riviera, so he's boiling too, I'm guessing.
ice water with brunch.
Yeah, that's good. So yeah, today we'll be talking about a specific theme, but I did have the idea that Danny and I discussed, and that is it's based on very simple and obvious things. Coming to the symposium, what do we want to show off? We want to show off some experimenting, and of course, we would also ideally like to find a thing that is useful to do in XR, as we've been hunting around forever, right? So we're looking at a lot of those things, but there's one thing that I think we should segregate and look at properly, and that is citations in XR, right? A space of rethinking where using the work that Mark has done and Fabian has done with parsing PDFs, we have proper discussions of, okay, here's an entire new, it's very much related to last year and building of it, but here's an environment where you can choose to see only the author's names. And now with the maturity we have after a year and a half of working on this, we can ask further, what does that mean? Right? And how do we now change that to only show this, that, or the other? In other words, have some specific dialogue on, I'm a bit frustrated with this material. I want to navigate primarily by citations. Doesn't that sound like one reasonable thing we can imagine in a movie, someone being frustrated putting on a headset and they have spatialized, that kind of stuff?
Mark, what are your thoughts on that?
I saw his head.
I saw his head shaking.
No. I was thinking. Yes. I mean,
It occurs to me looking back across the 18 months or something, the project, the one area that certainly has sort of stood out as being, in a sense, interesting and possibly less problematic is essentially information triage, um, as opposed to, say, getting to the point where one's doing long form writing. So it's moving the bits around, creating the associations, where that sort of dynamic space, I think, works in its favor. As to the point about referencing, my mind actually was thinking somewhere else, which is the sort of thing that we sort of touched on in the first year, which is I've got a paper. Where have I used the all the references? So, for instance, I just got actually Word on my HT25 paper, so that's got 182 references at the moment, and about 230 references in the BibTeX set. So one of the things I'm now thinking about is, okay, well, where are they? Which were the ones I didn't use, and so I can go back and look at why, or possibly remove some of the ones that are there. Because there's ever some really cogent feedback, and I've written right up to the very limit that I'm allowed. So all these other things said, this is very interesting, but why didn't you cover X? You're thinking, well, I've had another 4 pages probably. So yes, I mean, the going back to your point is, okay, so we can bring the references. I think we need to look into it a little further and say it's more than about the showing, which is the sort of the dynamic, that's almost the interface of it. But what asking why are we wanting to change those things? What is the impetus to stick on the headset to do this? And I think essentially it's going to be something to do with triage, whether a document you have where the references fall within it, or whether they're used or not, or possibly I've got a boatload of references that I know are broadly pertinent to the thing I've got. What I want is just a space where I can have at them. So, if Dini wants to throw them across the virtual space, she can. So we have this space, we can set it up to do what we like. But the thing maybe that we're interacting within it may well be knowledge objects, for want of a better term, that are essentially references.
Can I respond to that very quickly before Peter take? So Mark, what we're going to do in the next week when I'm coming back from my trip is make a list of all the different things that we are discovering, and then look at those and figure out who needs to take those and write about them and respond to them. And Frodo and I were talking this morning that references is something definitely you should be talking about. That's your expertise. So, and I will mention that my concern is that we have done a lot of really cool stuff this past year and a half. And some of the things can be easily picked up by big companies and patented. And part of the project is the promise we made Sloan is that we're not going to do that, right? We're not patenting anything. And we're trying to make this free for scholars, right? But it doesn't mean that it doesn't, yeah. But we can't keep big companies from coming and doing this and taking things from us. But if we publish it, if we copyright our articles, send it into ACM or various organizations, copyright the book under Creative Commons, then they have to at least give us credit. So Mark, your comments about references need to be documented so that we can do that, right? So that we can have that on record. And it's not just our group meetings on a video, right? It's more formal. And I'll stop there and go to Peter. Thank you, Peter, for your patience.
Peter, I just need to really underline what Dini said. And I have to ask you guys to write more. And I have to, because of what Dini said, but also if you write a single sentence or paragraph and email it to us, it'll go in the book. We'll find a way to structure it. Don't think everything has to be a gosh darn blue sky paper with 200 references. If you just have a thing of, I think so-and-so, blah, blah, my experience, blah, blah, perfection. Over to you, Peter.
Okay. I just dropped a link to a website called Research Rabbit. I don't know whether you've heard of it. It's sort of like Papercube. It's a combination reference manager, bibliometric visualization, data finding search engine aid. And I've been using it. It's very, very nice. But the first thing that drove me absolutely nuts was how constrained I was by the limitations of my laptop screen. I mean, even with the large wide format laptop, it has a finder column mode model where you enter one reference and then you expand out for a visualization of the sources cited in that reference. You can click on one of those, and then that moves off to another column. And there just isn't enough horizontal width on a computer screen to be able to work with it more than 2 or 3 hops in the environment. And my first thought was, gee, I want to have my headset on when I'm using their service because there isn't enough screen space. Even putting the laptop screen in the headset still wouldn't be nearly as much as we could get if we could just use that kind of a mode of bouncing from reference to visualization of the sources in the reference, bounce to the next one with the unlimited space that the headset lets us have. And it really made me glad that Frode dragged me kicking and screaming into a headset because I can see how much better it would be in that environment than on a regular laptop screen for that mode of interaction. So you can grab free accounts. Now, they're not charging. It looks like it's possibly some former academics who are behind the company. And their goal at the moment is to get the technology out there and to help other researchers with the frustration of managing their huge suites of references that they've been piling up over the years. So a really neat system, well worth playing with. I discovered a few great papers. Deanie's well represented in it too. There's like I punched her name in and a whole slew of stuff and hundreds of collaborators and all popped up. And it was really neat seeing that cluster all visualized around her. So great system.
Take a picture of that. Let me
So
see
the
it.
price is right.
Take a
Danny,
picture. Let me
It's
see
a
what it looks
strong
like.
case for moving into the headset.
I had a look at the introduction video on the front page with the music of Peter when you were talking. It's really cool. It's worth us studying. Thank you. And yeah, Fabian. Fabian, I can't hear you. Were you talking? Should we just guess what Fabian is saying?
I'm mouth. I can. What's it called? Lip read.
I'll just put everything you
In
said
French.
over the last few years into one of the LLMs and predict. He's restarting. Okay. In a few minutes.
And now, can you hear me?
He's back already.
Yes, too fast. Okay. So what was actually to come back on your point, Dini, about I guess defense with big
Defense.
companies. Yeah, I'm not sure how to put it, but one of the main reason I was using social media professionally or social networks professionally until recently was basically to show the work, to get benefits out of discussions with people, but also to kind of like put a stick in the sand and say, hey, I've done that then. You might not like it, you might think it's idiotic, but there is like a shared reference that on that day, this, whatever it is, prototype, code, video, whatever, has been shared with the world. So that was kind of, I guess, that was my naive way to kind of say this has been done. So there is prior art. It doesn't mean I was the first to do it, but at least on that day, I've done that. So yeah, I see the perspective. As a not lawyer, but I've seen quite a few open source projects where, like just recently, I was seeing Microsoft reuse something by literally renaming the repository. They said like it was tool to do whatever, and they called it super tool to do something else. It was as basic as that, and they gave no credit. And a lot of the comments in that thread were like, well, but they're legally allowed to do this because the open source license that the author of that code did put was allowing this. I didn't even comment because honestly, I was kind of triggered like, yes, but that's morally or ethically, it's different. Even though legally you can do this, I don't think that's good. Like, I don't want to be a part of society like this. So it's kind of, I think I understand the intent and agree with this. I'm not a lawyer though, and I think it's the kind of situation where if we don't understand the legal intricacies, we're probably going to get disappointed or worst.
I'm going to say I just wrote in here, moral and legal not always the same, right? What's legal may not be moral, and what's moral may not be legal. Martin Luther King letter from the Birmingham jail.
Absolutely.
Just saying.
And for the symposium, so I put this on the chat also, but I think one thing I haven't explored a lot, but while discussing recently with Fraud, I think is underexplored, and I think would be useful here is, and it goes a little bit with non-Euclidean geometry, is the idea that you need interfaces and you need things that are not literal. So, for example, you might want to see a paper and then you see the content of the paper. But if you step back, so if you zoom away from it, maybe you want just the title and you actually want to hide what's inside. Maybe not. Maybe when you're like 2 feet away or 3 meters or whatever. And I think this we kind of explored a little bit, but not so much. And I'm rather convinced that there is more to dig or to benefit from in there, where we see like the same content, but in the different representation based on how far we are with it, because there is probably some semantic value from that. Like if you're far away, you probably don't want to interact with one of them, but rather many of them. And as our Mark was kind of going into about triage, then that's probably the back and forth. You don't do the same steps within that process. So I think this is not something we explored much, and I bet, but just an intuition, that there is quite some mileage into this, and it's not something that in terms of real life you can do. If you look at the books behind me, you don't suddenly see, based on how close you are, like different representation. Just like you can squint your eyes, but it's not the same as dynamically changing how it's represented.
So that's basically the topic for today. On the zoomable thing, another interesting way, I think, of looking at it is, if you look at something like my hand, if you could see every single cell, every single atom, you couldn't really see the hand. So reducing resolution sometimes allow you to see different things. It doesn't necessarily mean less. So I'm just adding to what you're saying, probably, and agreeing. So I put up a little bit of a description of an outline for today, because one thing Bob Horn does really, really well when he doesn't have a clash and when he joins us is two things. He says, write it down, and two, list and structure it, right? So I don't have any presentation for today, but what I have is a few things to highlight. Please don't feel you need to read this. I think we agree on the design criteria, and what I'm talking about now is interactions in XR. That's the topic, right? The design criteria is that a new user should be comfortable using the system after a brief introduction, and as the user becomes more familiar with the system, a richer degree of opportunity should become apparent to the user. We agree with that, right? A bit of an on-ramp, and then the whole point is, if you want to be a super user, it should be possible, right? In that regard, there's just three things to show you for us to discuss now. First one is, I was reversing the order of this. Exactly what Fabian was talking about. What kind of operations should be possible, right? Staying within academic user and XR. So I'm just going to read through this list, and if you have any additions, actually, I'll do all of it and go back. I don't want to waste too much time putting you guys to sleep, right? So there are things like how to bring information into the space, how to specify view and layouts, all of that, right? Once we agree on such a list, at least an initial list, we can then look at how that maps onto commands. What are the interaction commands that will make those operations possible? And then we get down to the exciting bits. What are the actual interfaces? So the reason I think this is exciting, I'll go back and I'll stop sharing for a second because I think this is super cool. Oh, Brandel, your timing is impeccable. So one thing that has come out of the discussions Dini and Fabienne and I have been having is, last year we had a hand menu. This year we have a ring menu. For me, I have to admit, I've been really quite stupid with this, which I don't mind, because I don't mind admitting, because that's where we learn. Which one are we going to choose? And it turns out we don't have to choose, because there's two categories of commands, at least, depending on how we split it, right? One is a command you want to issue onto something you're touching or pointing to, right? That's basically a context menu. And that's basically Is Brandel there? So don't.
He disappeared.
Oh, okay.
He's
Oh,
back.
you're in the headset, man.
Yeah.
I wish I could be, but then I'm not recording. Anyway, Brandel, I just wanted to mention we're going through today, being a bit listy in the beginning. What kind of things should we be able to do in XR? What are the interactions and what are the gestures to go with that? So we have the mono menu and we have the ring menu. And what seems to make sense, as Fabian pointed out, thank you for making me feel really stupid, Fabian, is the ring menu is basically a context menu, a right-click menu, or whatever some people call it. So when you select something, you then get options for what to do. That makes sense because on the other side of it, we're trying to give commands without a selection. So this is how it's mapped out. And this is early, it's to be provocative for a discussion. I'm not pretending this is all done, okay? So if we try to do rough categories of commands, there are some like find and retrieve, as in go and get me this information or document that you want to do based on something you're touching or just speaking or typing or whatever, just without anything. Same with clipboard. In order to copy, duplicate, or cut, you need to have something to touch through some means. But you don't need to do that to paste something. So that should be available in both. Views, as we discussed many times, you should be able to define a view based on what you're touching or the entire space or environment, right? Then there is, I am now touching a thing, show me attributes or show me where it's from. What is the source of this thing? Where did I copy it from? Whatever. Connect, you can only connect to things you have. You can't connect to not, right? And then format to define or just make it bold or whatever. And then, of course, we have settings, which can be space, user settings, and all of that. The reason I think it's important to start mapping these things out is to decide where they should go, what interface should handle them. And it seems that, I'm sorry if I'm repeating, but it seems to me that the ring menu should be for when you touch something, you can do that. You can't easily do the mono menu because how do you touch something and then use a hand menu? It's a bit clunky, right? So we separate. I have a touch menu, I have a general menu. That sounds poetic, doesn't it? Cool, right. So there's one more document here, and then I'll stop sharing. And this got kind of interesting this weekend, but believe it or not, I actually have a master's degree in ergonomics, which is almost by accident, but I'm not very good at it, but it made me think. If you can all copy me, take your hand out to where something may be in space. Let's pretend you're selecting a sentence, right? And pull it towards you a little bit. If you go up or down or right or left or at 45-degree angles, the muscles you use are different. If you do just one, it doesn't matter that much. But for instance, if you pull down and to the left, which is very natural, it constricts your next opportunities. To now go even further down and left isn't really useful, right? If you do it a lot. So I'm saying not just now, but in the future, when we start doing these designs for submenus and stuff, because they are from our muscles, tendrils, and skeleton, it gets really exciting to actually look at these levels of detail. We may also look at micro gestures. I mean, when I designed the hyperwords menu, it was designed based on the movement of this finger, of where it should appear, right? Now we have all of this. Brandel's been talking to us for so long about the opportunities. So I think we're at a stage now where we can together look at a list of what things should be possible, which interaction system should we use, and how can we finesse these things. I'm going to copy and paste this to our shared chat so you don't need to stare at my screen all day. Any initial comments or questions or big whoops because it's very exciting?
Just a quick one. I asked because I don't know. Sorry about the competition of the traffic. Noise is off. Is when you're talking about some movement, is that to apply to one hand, i.e., is it a different direction if I'm using the other hand?
Yeah. So
right. So that has an immediate implication. So that means anything you map for hand A then has to be flipped if the master hand is the other one.
Probably. And the reason I say probably is, of course, we need to be able to reverse. However, if I understand correctly from the lefties in the room, very often the interfaces don't allow you to do that. So you become a bit ambidextrous. So it's just really important to support what in reality a lefty would do, not necessarily what they would do if it's a straight swap.
I wonder about that. I mean, I just had to do, just recently, I did a massive data reduction task that turned out to be manual because everyone said, oh, you just use software. Well, it turned out it's impossible. So I was doing the ref, and I was working manually. I think it was 15 mouse interactions per reference, and I was working fast enough to get speed limited as a bot, which I'm not sure is whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. But basically, a lot of things you used to do remotely, you can't do now. And I think it's because publishers are putting up defenses against the AI data rate that's going on.
Hi, Jim. Yeah.
But it's sort of interesting because I'm not sure that you do become ambidextrous. I'm left-handed.
No.
I used a mouse before they had left-handed mice.
Oh,
Mark. I can't work with this hand at nearly half the speed I can.
No, Mark, that's not what I meant. I'm sorry. I mean that lefties should absolutely be full first-class citizens or whatever. Everything should be reversible, no question. So that's not what I meant. What I mean is there may have been something you've gotten used to because the world just doesn't do that. So we shouldn't preclude you also having that option. So it is fully in agreement with you. I just want to say, as a brief side issue, I've been working more on the menu system for Ask AI and Author. And the reason it has been a pain is obviously I want people to have lots of prompts to choose from, but I want them to have short menus. That means hierarchical menu. However, that can be a bit of a faff. So what you put top level, what you put in folders. And it's really relevant to what you said, Mark, because there's 3 types of interactions now with the AI. 1, select text and do the thing, you get the result. You've all seen that. Second one is called alter text. I select text to translate to English, and it changes the original text automatically. So the user needs to know consistently that that command does it. They don't get confused. What the hell happened, right? Finally, copy the result. Let's say you select a large amount of text and you want to have, let's say, keywords. You see nothing visual, but it's copied to your clipboard to be pasted. I'm saying that because it relates a little bit, Mark, to the kind of multi-clicks you have to do, that we need to be aware that in some cases, we want to do things, but we want the results presented to us in very different ways. So I think it's important what you had to suffer through. No, it cannot all be automated. Brandel, please.
One of the things that it struck me that you are sort of referring to is whether you're talking about transitive or intransitive actions. You know, transitive actions, you take on things, and so that they implicitly have a subject like that, or an object rather, that you have to do things to, and they imply generally a grip and other things like that, and so it's anything where there's specific sort of grip characteristics. There's going to be an intrinsic chirality too, like because you know your index finger is next to your ring finger kind of thing, and so those kind of need to be flipped. It's also very similar to, I don't know about how much people have had to deal with right to left languages, but when you build great big commercial websites, and in particular, if you ever work in the Middle East, then you need to work with RTL. And one of the things that has been pretty good over the last, I want to say 5 to 10 years, has been the augmentation of HTML for the purposes of being able to represent things in visual row order versus logical row order. Instead of saying padding left, you say padding start. And so there are ways of being able to kind of disambiguate between what happens to be the visual formation of these things and the logical representation. And it's not exclusively the case that an inversion of something is appropriate for RTL, and in that same way, like the handedness is not going to be, if for the benefit of us lefties, I also am a lefty. I have tended to become more just straight ambidextrous with my mousing because I started when I was 6 years old. But yeah, it's not going to be the case that the chirality needs in all instances to be inverted simply for the topology of hands, but and it'll have more to do with its relationship and its proximity to grip, is my expectation. Although you raise a good point, Frode, that the musculature that people have isn't perfectly kind of symmetrical in terms of the ease of gesture kind of reach. So that's a thing to look for. But yeah, I really like what you were sort of saying about the fact, sort of recognizing that a marking menu kind of thing exists. And I would really, yeah, like think about it as transitive and intransitive verbs, and whether you need to do something to a thing versus simply doing a thing. And that I'm glad that you brought up my sort of the gestural richness of like doing a pointy finger versus a hand versus, doing all of these different things. I know Vision OS has colonized some of those things, and I apologize, but I still think that's in general the right way to go. So I appreciate the insight.
Yeah, thank you for that. That really adds to our vocabulary. So the link to the website listing for today was updated today, and it has these lists. And I really, really, really would like it if we can go through them, because we've been going through these for years. And then we do a new list, and then we get a messy one. I think what Fabienne has given us on the 6-month review is safety. Because like what Dini and I discussed this morning, if we have to submit to Sloan now, we're fine. Job done. Right? It's just absolutely no problem. So now we have a chance to really experiment and have fun for the next few months. And to do that, we can look at these different things separately or in tandem. The first one has to be, what are the kind of things we think people should be able to do? Mark.
Just a quick one. One thing I'd sort of feed into that list from before is that we should deliberately step up from not using small data sets. So one of the deliberate things is to give yourself too much, because part of the whole learning experience is that doing something with 5 things or 2 things, you very rapidly tend to get lost in polishing something that then when you try it with 20 doesn't work. So part of the thing is deliberately say, let's take 200 things, because we immediately have to face the sense that I can't tell what they all are. So how do we deal with the very thing that sort of Fabian raised is, okay, I'm probably going to effectively need this sort of contextual focus. I think it's something that, it sounds very abstract, but I think it's something that we actually deal with generally in our day-to-day life. We just don't think about it because it's almost like a built-in feature for us. But I think the only way we'll do that is to deliberately take a pointlessly large number. I don't mean so big that it just clogs everything up, but 100 rather than 10 things, deliberately, to stop us focusing on one thing at a time and getting lost in the detail.
I think that is very reasonable, Mark. So I will address it further, but the list of things, please go through it and add to it or edit it. But yes, I agree that we need a top level task. Now, we already have an annotated bibliography task. We already have kind of a mapping in space task. What I'm fantasizing about is mentally sharing the space with someone. I'm not saying we should have multi-user. I'm not saying that at all. But having a pleasant person who doesn't care about this too much go in. And my experience already shows moving a few things around. Wow, they love it. And then it doesn't take long to do exactly what you say, Mark. Okay. You have 100 things. How do you deal with those? So absolutely, the premise for the little bullet point list has to be, it is a significant amount of data that you need to deal with. And you talked about information triage, Mark. So I'm just saying that, Brandel, because I think it was before you came in. I think that makes perfect sense. And another thing we talked about was the primary thing of citations. So I think we all would agree that a heaven space would be citations and your own notes in a space that is completely malleable to deal with what we just talked about. So you can view things by your ideas, or view it by a person, or view it by a paper, or view it by topic, organize it in different ways. And now we finally get down to, how do we actually do that? Do we do it this way, or that way? We're at this level of implementation now, which is just wonderful.
Just quickly, are you talking about citations or references? I think you're talking about references. You're having objects that are effectively a proxy for a book or a paper or something. Citation being normally something specifically quoted in that, or the anchor that you then place in another object that points to the reference that dereferences to the object.
Mark,
sorry, I don't mean to be pedantic, but both citations and references have a use here.
You can't trick me that easily, because we have a PhD from the same location. And I personally happen to agree with your distinction. But looking around, the vocabulary changes all over the place. You have bibliographies that also have two different meanings. By citation, I mean something that is brought forth, which is kind of the etymological description. So whether we talk about references or citations or not, I don't care. But Mark, what you talked about in the beginning, you yourself talked about one document where you wondered why you have more references than you have citations because they were in your workspace, but you haven't used them. That is yet another important thing. And you know what? I wasn't going to show you this, guys, but I will. 1 second, because I was afraid Mark would explode. And I'm saying that with a smile, obviously. So if you look at this here, this is part of my paper, 28,000 words. And you see here's a citation right here in the body. So it's title, initial, date. That ain't normal, right? That's the kind of thing that probably wouldn't work for Mark, because he is schooled enough in this to want to have author date, which is, sorry, there's an update issue here. Now, okay, sorry about the size change. It's a test. Now it's just name and date. That's the normal, right? But we have one more, which is initial and date. So here, now they're all just TS 2009. The point of this is when you export, you still choose how you want it to look. So this is purely for you when you're working. So what I think we need to do in XR is free ourselves from the expectations of the final product and look at what are the ways we actually want to see these things, because they may be richer. And the zoomable interface, Fabian reminded us of, is a huge part of it, right? I don't like the term zoomable interface because I don't like zooms. I'm a, as you can see, prime lens guy. But to be able to change resolution, to change what level you're looking at, I think is really, really important. So
right.
now
level
now
of detail. The level of detail is the term of art used in computer graphics.
Yes.
LOD and LOD meshes is an intrinsic sort of component, and something that I've been kind of obsessed with is the way that mapping per se has its own LOD. You know, you recognize the continent of North America, and then in that California, and then in that NorCal, and then in that South Bay, and then in that Sunnyvale, and in that my street address. But we don't have that for writing. So I think that the like LOD is the same kind of concept and same kind of challenge as finding that for geospatial information, but for textual and informational stuff.
Yeah, someone said you can't see the forest for the trees, right? Which in this context is a nonsensical sentence. So what Fabian said here, yeah, actually, Fabian, do you mind speaking it?
Yeah, sure. No, that I had in mind actually specifically the case against reality and how he, the author, which name I forgot, but I'll put the link in the chat. He's kind of arguing everything is an interface. When you walk through the world, as you gave the example of your hand phone, it's just too much information. So you need a way to kind of summarize based on the action you're conducting. So whatever it is, like if you're baking bread or if you're writing a paper, it's not the same information, but you will need the information to be usable for your task. And I think, yes, a level of detail is interesting from the technical standpoint, but typically I think most ways level of detail is used in video games, for example, is to try to keep performance acceptable. So when you get away and you look, let's say you're playing a video game, let's say Elden Ring, because I find it mind-blowing how you have, like you go up to a tree and you see the detail of the tree, and then you look away and the world is just, it's massive. It's ridiculous. and you don't get any performance hit. It's just like it's smooth. But then you play that game for like 50 or 100 hours, and you add that other tree on the other side of the actual world, which is, I don't know, maybe like 100 kilometers away, and it's still good. So technically that makes a lot of sense. But here the question is a bit, when you get further away, do you want it to actually be literal when there is no change to the world, or you want something to break and say it's not the thumbnail of a document, because here our trees are made out of the documents. Do we put an icon instead? And I say this with, I actually don't know. Maybe keeping it perfectly coherent the whole time using level of detail is the right way. My intuition is probably not. Maybe having side by side, maybe having the literal one and the icon with the interface representation of it might be interesting. Maybe here we can have a VR and then an HUD with AR that shows both representation based on how you look at it. I actually don't know. I'm just like saying whatever goes through my head there. But yeah, the difference between just technical LOD, which would still be useful, and different representation based on distance, posture. I'm not sure what. Yeah, that's just an open question.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to formulate a better language around this, because in computer graphics, it is about optimizing. This is about getting the right information depending on how you view and how to change it. Mark, I'm going to go through a list, so please interject if it's someone quick to do with this.
Yes, it is. Just to say that, I mean, it makes me think of something I was thinking of in a separate context, which is that you'd mentioned also sort of collaborative things. So if we're looking to make a space that all of us can effectively, so we can be co-present, but we're looking essentially at the same thing, or if we're walking around in it, now the level of detail's got to vary by each individual person. If it's basically one image, for want of a better word, being projected to everyone, who are sort of co-present, can talk and communicate, but essentially are broadly seeing the same thing, our level of detail issue, I suspect, is less than if I've got 4 people stood in different places in a sort of world of information, because they will all be at different distance from objects. And it may be that if one of our judgments is if we're closer to an object, we might like to see more level of detail. I'm not saying that is the case, but it's a sort of likely starting consideration. Now you've basically got an almost an LOD engine running for each person, and put 20 people in the space. Now you've got 20 LOD engines, and we have another thing that, lo and behold, scales badly.
Yeah, so I think actually I have to run for a quick second, but please have a look at this list of what we should be able to do and add to it. I'll be back in literally 1 minute. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, in practice, LOD does have to run per client. So individuals tend to have their own individual views for the purposes of kind of mediating ostensibly a single objective world. Um, my I agree with you, Fabian, that like it's not so much about having sort of a sort of perceptual continuity as recognizing that there is information and detail past a certain level of distance and proximity that is irrelevant, that doesn't convey any additional useful information. Something that I've been thinking about as I've been reading a lot of books actually in Vision Pro and going back and forth. I'm taking, like, as you've maybe noticed, a lot of meetings in Vision Pro, um, and thinking about what I want out of it, what I want to do with it, and um, one of the things that you lose is context. You know, if you read an ebook versus a paper book, other things like that. So something that have been thinking about as well, because my wife now works at the Cantor Art Museum, which is the big Stanford one, and they have a big mural of the Stanford family on the wall. And my daughter reflected that it seemed like the sort of ancient imperial Japanese murals of royal succession and stuff like that. And that reminded me of like British tapestries and other kind of wall art, cave painting kind of things. particularly pre-Renaissance depictions of sequential information and other things like that. And that made me think of the idea instead of a table of contents, of a tapestry of contents. This idea that you could have these kind of iconic sequential representations of texts that you could that act as a shorthand, kind of like um, overtures in a musical, where you have the ability to kind of refer to those, and they could actually be adaptive and updating as you kind of advance through a text in order to have kind of a shorthand of like what it is that something means as you progress. Anyway, that was my where I was playing with and where I've gotten to with the context and a concept of level of detail and what might be a valid representation of a text or a book as we advance through it, so that it has relevance at a degree of remove that you don't necessarily get from just looking at the raw glyphs. Anyway.
Brandel, that reminds me to ask you, the new environment for Vision OS 26, the setting on a planet, looking at another planet, is that included in the builds now? Because I don't have it on mine.
Should be.
Because I've
I mean,
seen a few others also wondering when it's coming.
maybe it's not, but it's been announced. So I wouldn't be able to tell you if it's not announced. If it's so it's announced, so you know about it. If it's not there, I wouldn't be able to tell you when it's there. But
yeah, no,
that I have a high degree of confidence. You're not unfortunately going to get the Severance scene. That's just something I made by myself, which was fun. But I'm glad that people are excited about it.
No, that's very cool. No, because it's very poetic. For those of you who don't use the vision a lot, it's basically you sit on the moon. What's the moon and what's the planet again?
It's Jupiter. Are you maybe sitting on Io?
Yeah.
No, Ganymede,
right.
maybe?
So, but imagine within the context of what we're talking about, you should do something like this, and now you have the entire solar system in your hand, right, as a tiny miniature. This is the kind of stuff we're talking about. What do we need to see? Right? Suddenly, what do you want to see? You want to see spacecraft trajectories or whatever it is, but we're doing it in a different realm. It's just a bit evocative, that one. So do you have anything to add to the list here? Shall I read it? Okay. We need to figure out, well, okay, first of all, to see the feeling in the room, do you guys like the idea of pinch and rings as a context menu versus mana menu for things that you don't have selected for all kinds of settings? It makes sense, right? I got one yellow hand, one thumb. Tom and Jim are thinking.
My sense is it, as ever, will be sort of context dependent. And this is one of the problems about planning this with no context. So I get back to what I literally, when it's a bit like taking a box of Lego, pour it on the floor and say, okay, I'm not worried about how the Lego gets into the space. I just empty the box to start with. I can go back and I can think as I deal with it, would it be useful if I had a better way of saying the blue bricks coming in separately from the red bricks?
Mark,
but it's important because, again, when I look at this list, we're getting lost in interactions. And
Okay, Mark. I have to pause you there. I have to, because we've had 2 years of this. We've agreed that there should be something like 100 items in there. You've said you want to do information triage. That's totally fine. So the assumption has to be that we're dealing with at least academic papers, maybe separately authors, maybe separately your own notes. So we're not dealing with abstract notions. And if you click on the link to go to the websites, there is a bit of a hierarchy of things to do, right? So I am not saying that we should now lock into one menu does this and another menu does that, but we need a starting point, right? Because right now you can do, Mark, what you talked about, you can move these, if you go in, let's say a map from author into what Fabian has built, they can all be empty. They can be Lego blocks. So you can do that. We have that. You pushed for it. I agreed with you and we have it. So now it's the question of what are the known basic molecules of action that we need to have in order to fulfill what you're talking about, right? We need to get to that level now. And if it turns out that it's absolute rubbish, fantastic. That's a research outcome and we change it. So Fabian, please hold your guns for a few more seconds if anyone else has a comment on the specific thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think things like if people end up with more ubiquitous fiducials, that would have a huge impact because grips are really impactful on how we understand what we're doing and the nuance and the sophistication. You can't see if I hold anything in my hand. You can see my hands, but you couldn't see if I had a pen in it, unfortunately, because Vision OS. But um, if and Apple released support for the for a pen, um, the
Logitech, yeah.
the Logitech one, yeah, um, and PSVR2, other things like that. Like, I have not played much with those since I got Vision OS and being able to use just straight hands. But I do actually have the MX Ink for the MetaQuest. And I think that would be a really useful thing, but it depends on the sort of the ubiquity of that as an available resource, because I think that there's a lot you can do, and then it depends on the fidelity of the input on the pen. But I think if you're saying all things being equal with sort of current tracking capabilities and other things like that, then it totally is reasonable to try to pin down, given where we are, that this is what we could do, but that it could
Yep.
change if anything changes.
Yes, in addition to that, Randall, this is not instead of a Bluetooth keyboard or anything you mentioned. It's not instead of voice. This is an adjunct, so it's just to be able to do these kinds of things. And Fabian, you've been very patient, and you're wearing a Hawaii shirt, so go ahead.
Well, actually, it's good that you mentioned this at the end, because that's the question is, we don't necessarily need dichotomy or choice or splitting them. And one of the best experience I had was, for example, using both hand tracking and voice or speech recognition rather, and coupling those different ways to interact. That really felt kind of like a superpower. So I'm not saying we can be naive and saying we just throw everything and anything, and that's fine. But we don't necessarily need to split or to separate too early. And I think what's probably interesting is, are those composable? Like, can we use both the hand menu, or do we do like the special pinch through the ring? What are those that are at least not incompatible? They might be a little bit awkward, but every time there is like, I need to learn this or learn that, and I have like a kind of sequence of motions, and I'm not playing a video game, so I do it for like productivity. And so it's an actual investment. Then I'm kind of wary that like I had those kind of rings you put on your fingers. I think tap something. I forgot the name of it. And I used it, and it was kind of fun. But I never bothered, to be honest. I did not bother learning the gestures, so I enjoyed because it was different, but not. So that would be kind of my warning, that let's be pragmatic, like how we do this, and maybe based on the task, as Mark is often reiterating, what is the actual process that we try to have those interaction on or for. But we don't need to remove too much. And if they are not incompatible, at least, even though awkward, and we can, one helps the other, I think that's a lot more exciting for most people.
Peter, and then I'm going to comment on Mark's comment.
Okay, I was wondering, have we worked out an affordance for doing multiple selections of citations? Because working with Research Rabbit, I'm thinking more in terms for information triage of building up sets of citations and then wanting to do set comparison operations across them. For instance, say I have 5 or 6 selections that I've made in a multiple selection. I'd like to have an operation where I can see the union of all their citations, see the intersection of their citations, and just show me citations that haven't appeared in more than one of them. And I think being able to pull those results out into their own sets would be very valuable. So some sort of clustering mechanism where we can build sets and do set operations. How to do it? Maybe say make a fist with your left hand and then touch things with your right hand to put them in a bag. And then maybe if you pop your index finger out of your clenched fist, that could say, okay, now I want to create a new representation of everything that was in that collection and have that become visualized in the environment and remain persistent.
Yeah, so that's exactly what we need to discuss now, Peter. Let me just share this, because we obviously shouldn't just have a pop your index finger and that's it. These commands need to be somewhat coherent. So in order to do some of the view commands, you definitely need the ability to select more than one item. I think that's very important. Whether you do that manually, like something like this, or whether you do it by criteria, like So, well, and here I don't have any. So I've added that as a note here, so thank you. But Mark, you kind of separated the getting things in and out. Absolutely have no problems with that. Copy, paste, clipboard, and find, retrieve are very specific actions that are a bit different from the other ones. And then within, okay, I guess settings, in a sense, is almost like we got to remember we need it. It's we don't know what to put in there. So then we're getting to the taxonomy of dealing with the view as a whole or other aspects of it. And how do you get more information? That could be the zoomable thing. We need a better name. Or it could be through a more manual operation. But these four here, yeah, sorry, Mark, go on.
No, I just think I think what I'm noticing is what's missing there is actually the first thing. You've got a whole lot of stuff. It's actually the very simple thing of how do I just sort of do that first sort? What are the those, and they may be, and this gets us closer to the thing about what sort of touch or pinch gestures do we want? Because I'm probably going to start with something because it's too easy to say, well, we'll start with something in an arrangement because in other words, I'm going to not give myself a problem by cheating, by giving myself something that's not overcomplicated. The whole reason I'm suggesting just start with a pile of stuff is that's actually realistically how an awful lot of work starts because you don't know the structure of it. So almost the first thing you're doing is trying to arrange it before we get to the things that are on that screen.
Okay, will this pile have attributes?
Well, if the pile is everything in the environment has an attribute. But I don't think...
What I mean is, since a few weeks ago, you mentioned little silver balls or something, right? To do the information triage, the way you're thinking about it, will the items that you are triaging have attributes that will be known to you?
Well, that's the whole point. That's the first test we want to do because just let me finish a second. Rather than actually try and pre-design it, because this is the problem. None of our choices are without opinion, and no matter how hard we try. So, one of the things I'm thinking about, drawing on sort of decades of doing lots of this sort of messy stuff, is that the biggest task to start with is just basically sorting the wood from the trees. Okay. And actually that's not overly complicated. And the thing is, you may have attributes, but one thing you won't have is you will not have consistent attributes across the piece. So I just think the last three things I've done in recent weeks, in every case, none of them were consistent across the piece. So every time you tried to do what you're hinting at, say, well, I'll just use this attribute, it doesn't work because it's either not there or it's incorrectly populated. So actually, when you're doing this, and I'm sorry to bang the drum, but it's because I've done it, and that's actually how it is. If you over-conceptualize the start point, you miss part of the difficulty and part of the basic mechanism I think we want to deal with first.
Mark, as you said, you've been banging on the drum for a very long period of time, so I'm familiar with it. But I'm saying the very first thing you're talking about, are you only talking about pinch and move?
I don't know, but what I'm not talking about is most of the other things on that list because I don't need them.
I'm trying to understand. So one of the things Fabian has built for us is to be able to have many pieces of knowledge in a space that you can pinch and move. So the triangulation, or triage rather, is there. Have you used it? And if so, how do you feel about it? And if so, what should we change about it?
Well, I'm not actually sure. I know we've done a test where we've already sort of pre-sorted something, and this is the thing I'm trying to step away from. Okay. Just imagine somebody, as they do, walks into your desk, walks into your office, puts on your desk a bucket of stuff, papers, whatever. No organization, no nothing, except it's all relevant to the task.
Right.
And
Can
one
I
of the things you're doing,
question?
whether it's digital or in
Mark,
the real
world, let Randall ask a question, please.
Yep.
So, because what it sounds like, so I'm you may both know that you're talking about the same thing. To me, it sounds like you are not talking about the same thing. It seems like what Frode is talking about is designing the repertoire of action to take over a set, and what Mark is talking about is the intrinsic uncertainty of the contents of the set. What's not clear to me is whether the intrinsic, which is not a dispute. What's not clear to me is whether the uncertainty of the contents of the set has an implication on what should be the available or the arrangement of the action repertoire available over it. Is that a reasonable framing? And what do you both
Well,
think about that?
and all I was trying to say is I just wanted to avoid us doubling down too early on the exact repertoire before we've actually thought of the framing. So you're absolutely right. Now, you put it extremely well, Brandon, so thank you for that. Because no, exactly, we're talking about different aspects of the same thing, but the challenge is that we can easily, within the limited time and energy that we have, end up creating a wonderful repertoire of things that don't work for the problem we're dealing with.
Right. So you are
And
saying that
yeah,
the variability of the stuff in the set may have an implication on the way in which you present the action repertoire. So,
absolutely.
okay. Sorry, that's all.
I would like to know, Mark, specifically, once you have your dump on your desk in the virtual space, what do you want to be able to do with it? And I want you to show me using your hands, as in, do you want to be able to move one over there? Or do you want, what, just exactly, because then we can find out, compared to what we have, compared to what we're talking about, please, without being hypothetical.
No, understood. It's literally, yes, it is a matter. Normally, one of the first things you're doing is doing very rough sort sets. So you're mainly
exactly
doing a
how.
lot of. Sorry,
I don't mean to interrupt. Just for clarity, Mark, I'm so sorry, but please pretend they are in front of you now. Can you show me, just for a few, what you want to do? Because I think this can already be done. So I just want to see what's different. So you have now, in the environment, you have a stack of knowledge objects, papers, or whatever, that just happens to be in a list. It's not organized alphabetically. It's just there. Please show me exactly what you'd like to do for the triage.
Well, exact is mostly happening here, so the hands don't really help. So what you're doing is, the best way I can describe it is you're basically doing a constantly iterative sort thing. So you'll say, yeah, this is not like that. That's not like that. Right, that's not like the first two things. Now these are a type, right? So what I'll do is I want now to define a type. So the next time I get one of those, I just say this is type X. I don't, and it can then, in a sense. So this is the incremental formalization. This is where you set of things that you want.
For the sake of not misunderstanding each other, show me. Let's say you have one item here that's relevant and one isn't. Please show me what to do, because I think you can already do that in what Fabian has built, and I'm trying to find out what you cannot, so that we can work together to make it possible.
So you would take, I mean, you start with something. I mean, you could think of it like a card deck. You take the next card off the top,
which we have. So in the space that we have it, so we have a card deck. So you're in that now, and you want to do the triage. What is the, please, just Mark, we've gone through this so many times, just so we don't waste time. Please tell me exactly with your hands what you want to do, because I don't understand what we don't have based on what you're saying. I think we already have it.
Well, what we don't have are, right. So when you take something, the first thing you tend to do is to say, what is this? Is this like something I already know? How does this relate to the problem that I'm dealing with? Is this shouldn't be here at all? Is that a toss over the shoulder? So you take an object, basically you take something off the stack, you interrogate it, and then you decide to do something with it, which might be, I will put it over there, or it might be, actually, I'm going to turn into a blue thing because I've already set up some says blue things go over there, or they don't go next to the yellow things. I'm being deliberately glib about the colors, but it could be something much more complicated.
But we can do this now, right? I mean, you take something out, you interrogate it by looking at what it is, and you can open some of them to really see it big, to really interrogate, and then you can place it somewhere, right? So
well, yes and no.
So what's missing then?
We have in parts of it, but this goes back to something that Brandel has actually quite eloquently put. It instead of being overly literal about the set, or we have this or that, saying, no, no, the relevance, the power, the use of the affordances we have very much relates to the task that's being done. Otherwise, what tends to happen is that you're feeding the interface because that's how it wants to work, rather than doing what you want to do. So, so for instance, one of the things that immediately comes up from your question is, okay, so I take something. At what point does the information that I want surface? Do I actually have to do manipulation on it to say, I want to go to a deeper level or a lesser level? Because it knows what it is informationally. It's all out there as ones and zeros in the environment, but I can't necessarily see it. And broadly, unless I can read it, or once I can start to basically do a sort of a sort on things, I can say use a shape or a color or something very simple as a proxy, such that I can be using several of these at once. And then suddenly it gets quite rich quite fast, and your work rate just zips up. So it's always slow at the beginning because you don't even know where the sort of the categories lie in the whole. But as you begin to get a spidey sense of where the bits are, then you can, in a sense, rather than just literally make clumps of stuff, you can begin to say, okay, this is a sort of type of something. I can now predict that I'm going to see some more of these. So I shall essentially do a bit of incremental formalization, and I maybe, in a sense, in simplistic terms, make some sort of macro that the moment I do some gesture, that this becomes something that is different from other things. So that's a very, very simple range of things there. But one of the things
is the thing missing that you want to be able to turn the card that represents the paper into a color or an icon? I really don't.
I'm getting lost in the literalism of it.
No, Mark. Sorry, we're trying not to go to the interface, which is literally literal. That is what it literally is. We need to decide when you pinch something, what are the options you can do? The triage you're talking about makes perfect sense. It's entirely reasonable. But in order to deliver on that, there are certain functionalities that need to be available to the user, right? I feel that we have them. I'm trying to find out of the ones we have and what we're looking at on the list, what is it the thing that you currently, with what Fabian has built, cannot do? Just so we can consider building it. Not just building it as a one-off, but putting it into a structure of using hands, rings, and whatever interfaces we might want, because we're literally at the rubber meets the road moment now.
Well, arguably, we have some of the bits, but whether they're sort of put together in the way is that, so you take something that is at first meeting essentially unknown to you, and you need to keep revealing information till you get to the point where it has salience for you and you know what to do with it. And you can't predict, certainly very early in the process, how deep you have to go, bearing in mind the point with the discussion we just had about level of detail. So it's probably that you need to iteratively work into the level of detail. So, it's one of those, right? Okay, I now know where, for the level of understanding I have in the space, what I need to do with it.
Yeah, I would say I'm just thinking something that I had to do last week was collect like 350 USDZ files and then kind of pull them apart to look at the constituent sort of sizes and resources. And then we were able to compare those against load times, against various RAM ceilings and other things like that. Unfortunately, the details of what you need to get into specifically up top matter a great deal for how you're structuring this, whether you need to be doing a lot of data processing over an individual one to then apply that as a litmus test for the subsequent things. You want to be able to kind of speculatively create a filter at various times and then see whether that gives you good sort of cleavage where you can kind of cleave the data this way or that. And so one, to Mark's point, develops a spidey sense of those things, but it is pretty difficult to ascertain the order in which those operations need to be kind of applied to be the most fruitful over the specific data set. So what we could do is look at a literal specific data set and try to imagine that. At the same time, we're in a pretty difficult situation because people who have developed that spidey sense have had to do so in a poverty of embodiment, so to speak, where we have these rich interior metaphors. Mark has a very strong, like he says, spidey sense, but because that's so dissociated from the specific physicality, it is difficult to kind of pick off the bat a specific representation for how that has kind of become anchored within his sense of what this repertoire is available. I have the same thing, and as I'm sure you will with Photoshop and Illustrator, Frodo, where like what using the lasso tool is, but it's not something that's necessarily anchored in your body. So yeah, I think the specifics matter, and the poverty that we're coming from makes it is sort of singularly difficult to kind of come up with a referent for what we should be doing to do that. But if we wanted to get, so one suggestion is if we literally like pick up a specific task, we could try to disentangle what literally we want to do with it, rather than saying like, what literally would we do with an abstract task? Like actually pick up a task like 200,000 headlines from the Daily Mirror over the last 20 years. Like that's a task, and it's a shitty one, but we are where we are. So hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully it's something that Mark can agree with.
Let's hear from Peter. Thank you, Brando. Peter?
Okay, at a very high abstract level, I think operation I'd want the triage time would be, say I've selected a reference, and imagine I already have 2 or 3 existing sets. So the operations I'd want would be to move this reference into an existing set, or clone the reference to create a new set that contains the reference, or create a new set with this reference and remove it from my current triage workspace. So one way I'm like permanently moving it into an existing set. Another way I'm dragging it out to permanently create a new set with that element, or I'm moving a shadow copy of it into a new set or an existing set. The other thing that I really think I need to track is this a reference that I physically possess now? I want to have them called out right away at all times as being distinct. So this is an artifact that exists in my library or in my digital library. I also want to be able to immediately see whether it's an artifact that belongs to my local lending library. So my preference would be for things I have, the next sources that are easiest to access. So I guess I'm thinking sort of like triaging in terms of accessibility. Show me the set out of all of these citations that are things I can go to my physical library and get immediately. Then the next hop out is my local library system, because I know that they can pull a book from White Plains or Yonkers for me, and I can have it within 2 to 3 days as soon as the Jeep drives up with selected references. Then the next top out is when you reach out to interlibrary loan. So then you're looking at items, and even there, you sort of triage that. You'll go to WorldCat and you'll look for items that are in WorldCat at universities and colleges that are within a relatively short physical driving distance of your home interlibrary lending library, and it would then pull them in from those. Then failing that, you start reaching out into the global interlibrary pool, and you might have a book come in from Syracuse or from a university in Arizona. And the difference is basically the time to be able to make access to the source. One way you're potentially waiting for a few weeks for the item to come in versus being able to just hop in your car, be at the library in 10 minutes, and have it that day.
Yeah, Peter, these are all really important things, but we do also, I mean, maybe not today, we don't have a lot of time left, but we do need to map out things we should be able to do, whether it's triage, pre-triage, after triage, whether it's getting a loan from Syracuse or whatever, and the buttons / using our fingers, gestures to enable these things to be possible. All right.
Okay.
No, Peter, because to say we should be able to do that is absolutely worthwhile, and be absolutely worthwhile to write it down. But today is one of those days we're discussing, for instance, the idea that we use the ring menu on selected objects. We use the hand menu on things that aren't selected, because you can't select your hand and a thing at the same time. Now that
okay, okay, here's what I'm picturing there. A simple thumb to index finger pinch to move something around without making a copy. Maybe two fingers pinched to my thumb to create a clone of the thing, either into a location where there's nothing or into an existing set.
That's
The other dimension that's kind of important for me is the degree of thoroughness that we have in terms of our representation. Say a level 1 reference might just be the name of the source alone. Level 2 might be the name plus an abstract. Level 3 might be the name, an abstract, and a digital copy that we can run processes on.
Can I
And
recommend something, Peter? This is great. What I would like to do, because we have so little time left in the grant, and Frodo and I talked about this morning, and that is to set up a series of spreadsheets. First, a wish list of things that we want to continue building out, and we want to get that done pretty quickly. And so that would go on the wish list. The second list will be things that we want to, topics, experiments we want to write about and document and get copyrighted. And that's the second thing. So I think we want to start to triage this, to use the term, to organize us in a way that we can move in different directions. There's things that some
yeah,
of
in
us
future grants, we really need to start thinking about putting in for grants to pick up after Sloan ends.
absolutely, there's things. So there's what's really cool. I mean, I was saying this to Frodo this morning, and I'll repeat it because some of you came a little bit later. Two things that I've come to realize as we've been working in this. And I'm playing with a lot of other VR, as you all are, to see what other people are doing, right? And so the first thing is that the productivity for scholars in XR is woefully behind, right? It's going to take a lot to get us there. We just know this. We've done a yeoman's work to get what we've done. What we've done is fantastic. And we've made lots of headway with Fabienne's, incredible input. That said, what I think we're doing really well, and we can continue to argue that is successful, is the creativity aspect. We can be immensely creative in this space, and that part can be continue to be built out a lot. So both can go, we can still go these different directions. Continue to build out productivity because I think there's a future in this, of course. It's just going to take time to get there. But then the creativity is already ready, right? We can hit the ground running two directions. But within those two directions are a lot of other little things. And so we want to look at mini grants, smaller grants, things that you can take on yourself and pull together your own teams and build this out. This is not the Deanie and Froda show forever. So hopefully we've given birth to a lot of ideas. But I do want to see us, even if you don't want to write a damn article, send us a paragraph that says, here's what I'd like, here's what we've done, here's what's important, and then send that to us. And we're going to document in our book these things because, as you know, we want to keep this open source and open. And if anyone takes this and starts to make money on it, we want them to be able to look back at us and say, this came out of this group. This was Peter's idea. This was Patrick's idea. This is what Mark came up with. This is Rob, and be able to point to you and say, this is what we did. And they can't do that if you don't damn write about it. Document.
Oh, I just dropped a link to a piece on academic productivity. It surfaced on Hacker News a couple days ago, but it's an interesting little book to read.
Great, thank you. Yes, rhizome exploration sprung up in every direction. I hope there's seeds. I go out in the garden and pull weeds all the time, and I wish our ideas would just proliferate like those. And we leave them in the ground. Mark says, a wish is thus how to quickly configure a prototype. In simple terms, it might be a keywords. We want something more powerful. Absolutely. So that needs to be documented, Mark. I'm going to use the book myself. I've got a couple of articles I've got for it, but I'm going to use it like a little, I don't know if you know who Wittgenstein is, but his tractates, which were little thought exercises, like a little thought process. This, and number them. And then Frodo has.
Sorry, Fred has hand up.
So all of these things are nice, but in my mind, I really think this is a time to literally put things in our hands and not be abstract. There will be no further discussions on interactions by me because it's too stressful, right? It really, really is too stressful. I tried to provide a list here of operations we should do that maybe we could expand or edit together. And the whole information triage we've discussed at length, we all agree it's very, very important. I've tried to put together a categorization of where might it make sense, but for some reason there doesn't seem to be an appetite for discussion of that in the group, because it isn't abstract anymore. It is not I go to and I do. Now we have to, if there's anything otherwise, Fabian will just have to invent it. And, even though he is very, very clever, it may not always be in the way we should have it. It's, if we're going to have a hand menu that does this with the pinky, how does that work with the rest of the fingers? What are we going to have, right? If we have this is what we talked about. If you pull something out and take it up, then you have a certain amount of energy or space to do a secondary command. To design these things have to be done at some point. I really tried by writing it up today to have it done, but to get back to discussions of, I just want to have things in space. I think it's over a year we've had things in space that we've interacted with. So we're going to do that. If someone has suggestions for this, if you want to write it down or have a specific discussion, of course I can do that. Of course I'm happy for that. But sorry, I was just looking at the chat, but I don't quite understand why there is not a appetite for, yeah, well, if you pull it here and we want to have a copy should probably, because people are going to do copy a lot, should probably be this. And then someone else says, yeah, however, I mean, the specificity of design is a huge, huge difficult thing. And in
I think
closing,
people are making these suggestions. I mean, I think that's the thing. And maybe that's the third spreadsheet, right?
well,
I mean,
what I
I
heard
think
from,
people are talking about this already. I mean, we're not the only one talking. I mean, Mark was talking about it.
no, I feel Mark was talking against it. Because what Mark said, I think you may have been on the call, that this is too early. No, sorry, there's things we need before this.
What?
Right? Hang on. So I just want to show you something here briefly, because this is new within the last few minutes. But this is the way that I think about building things, right? So in Author, we have a command for AI. I have to balance the design of having a hierarchical menu versus instant access, because if I do this, and then I do this, I just press A, it instantly jumps to it, right? That's fast and useful. But then the menu can be big. So that's why we now have submenus. So even for a 2D traditional menu, what goes in the top menu? What goes in a submenu? How should they be grouped? And also, as I think I may have mentioned earlier, some of these commands alter the text. So that's why there's a submenu for commands that may be the same as these ones, but they'll alter the text in situ. Another one, copy the result to clipboard. To actually figure out how to be able to move in the environment requires the design and redesign of hopefully much richer things in XR. But for some reason, we've had an hour and a half today, and we don't really get to that. It's always, let's step back. So I guess Monday meetings should be therefore invested in the stepping back than the more abstract levels. Brendel, were you saying something?
I was just going to try to act like a Mark whisperer, although Mark can probably speak on his own behalf. I think what I was getting was that um, it bears to be crushingly concrete in order to have discussions about the appropriateness of a UI. So not just like, say, I need to copy things, but literally going through 200,000 headlines from The Sun from 1960 to present, and being able to kind of look at and analyze a task. That is hard because it means that it needs to be a much more physicalized and potentially better simulated kind of exercise, maybe Wizard of Oz style, where you have somebody acting on behalf of your sort of gestures in order to interpret their appropriateness and things like that. But yeah, like being able to really see, because sometimes you're pasting more than others, and that may have an impact on how with the proximity that you want to have paste. And that's at odds with, admittedly, at the same time as that being at odds with the cognitive benefits of a spatial stability of the position of paste, but those are trade-offs that need to be made in the context of specific sort of actions for specific goals that it is just really hard to get to without going to that final concreteness of I am doing this to go through 200,000 headlines from the Sun from 1960 to present, because until you have that, you're still guessing. So yeah, I'm sorry to put words in your mouth, Mark.
No, I mean, essentially similar. I think, and one of the things it does make me think is, so how I want might say affect something like a cut or a copy actually might want to change, now you mention it, depending on the task I'm doing. I mean, this arm is recovering from doing, I don't know, 7,000 mouse movements in several hours. But that was quicker than basically writing a program, which is the reality of work. But yeah, and some of the things that could have been made easy. So I automated things I could. I wrote some small macros for things I could, because it wasn't going to be something you could solve with code. It should have been, but it wasn't. And so I'm very aware of that, and how that affects on the approach you have. Instead of saying, well, that I have this palette of things I wish to do, which we would agree on, but they are to a degree linked to what you're doing. So the mention, I just want to clarify that when I mention prototype, because it probably means different things to different people, but I'm used to it in terms of sort of knowledge systems where effectively one object becomes a proxy, a styled proxy for many others. So just by changing the proxy, I can change the 40 other or 4,000.
Mark, we're out of time. Fabian has a presentation that's gone over. I still am not sure what that means, but yeah, thank you.
Well, I guess I'm showing you something. It will be extremely quick. Let me know if you can see my screen, please.
Yep.
So the first one is extremely quick. You have code on the left, which actually runs. It's a filter for CSV. You might see it from there. And it's syntax highlighted, namely the words have little colors. If you're a developer, it's basically how you read. If you're not a developer, that helps you to process, I guess, the code a bit, a lot more efficiently. I cannot basically read more than 3 lines of code without colors. And it's a lot more efficient than before. I'll put a link, but it's using Shiki. And you can parameterize the color scheme, so whatever you want, the color, the language, etc. Why do I also show this? Is because then you can change that code to change how things are around you. And since we have a kind of virtual keyboard we can configure with a full layout, that becomes a lot more exciting, I think. And to open up more, we did a little, or I did a little extension. So it's a browser extension. Like here, you see me on my browser. And if I use, if I go on a random page, you can see this button on the top left corner. And if I click on it, it will not do anything interesting, except that you see on the URL bar that this URL here has been used as a parameter there. So then we can start to do things with that URL. I don't know yet how we should do this. We have a couple of examples, but yeah, that's basically the idea that on any page you go to, then this little button appear and then you can open it. That's it.
Thank you, Fabian.
That's awesome.
Love it.
It's very good to see the progress. And yeah, we haven't set a schedule for July yet, but there will be one. So we will see. Oh, are you traveling? All right, summer class, right? Okay, but we will continue, and there will be emails. And thank you, everyone, for today. Bye for now.
Bye-bye. Have a great week.
Look at the model element if you have Vision Pro.
Oh, yeah. Send us a link to something specific if you don't mind. I'll put it on right now.
The blog post.
The
blog post has all the examples in it.
On Slack. Yeah.
The blog post on that we have on Slack already. Okay, I will look at that in the headset.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some amazing things happening with that. So thank you, Brundle.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Right. So, oh, Fabian, you're gone as well. Okay.